Spider-Man is one of the most beloved comic book characters of all time, and we've been privileged to have 3 different big-budget live-action versions of the character over the last 20 years. So today I'm going to stop and rank all 3 theatrical live-action versions of Spider-Man from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the Spider-Man. And if you want to throw in the different interpretations from Spider-Man into the Spider-Verse, go ahead and do that. Let's just have a nice, lively discussion about this character that we love. As we go into this, I'm ranking them based off of the performance, the characterization, and the character arc. As we go into this, there was actually a 4th live-action Peter Parker in a short-lived 1970s TV show. He was played by Nicholas Hammond. In some parts of the world, they actually edited a few episodes of the TV show together into a movie and released it into theaters, but it wasn't created to be a theatrical movie, so I did not include this version here in this list. With that said, let's get started. In 3rd place is Andrew Garfield. While I did put him in last, I still think he did a great job with the material that he was given. As a thespian, I think that he's the strongest of the 3 actors. He does a great job portraying Peter Parker, not as a comic book character, but as a real person that's trying to figure out life, love, and being a superhero. And I think this is best on display in his relationship with Gwen Stacy. I just think that Garfield and Emma Stone have amazing chemistry on screen, and I just love the dynamics between the 2 of them. I would actually really enjoy it if Marc Webb directed a movie in the style of 500 Days of Summer that starred Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone. What I think holds this version of Spider-Man back is the movies themselves and the legacy that they were following. This movie came out right after the Raimi films, and Raimi did such a traditional take on the character that it somewhat forced them into a corner where they had to try and do something different. So first off, they tried to modernize Peter Parker and change his nerdiness to feel like the 21st century. In and of itself, I think that that's a really good idea, but the specific execution had him come off too cool, too good looking, and too much like a 2012 hipster rather than a nerd into his studies. Second, they cranked up the teenage angst aspect of the character, if that was an aspect of the character in the first place, and Garfield sells it so well and is so believable that it makes an impact on you, so much so that it kind of taints the entire interpretation because that's what you remember. You do get some quips here and there inside of the character, but you remember Garfield's version for the angst, not the lighthearted nature of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. Finally, they added this whole mystery surrounding Peter Parker's parents, his origin, and why only he could turn into Spider-Man. And in doing so and adding all this complexity into it, they actually made Peter Parker and his origin story way less interesting for me. So while I think Garfield did a great job himself, the actual version that they were trying to create of the character, I think, fell a little bit flat. Our runner-up is Tobey Maguire. By being the first big-budget cinematic Spider-Man, they've benefited greatly by being able to just tell a classic version of the character in a straightforward version of his story. Raimi, through his 3 films, was able to touch on all of the quintessential Spider-Man trademarks. He's a teenage nerd that's picked on by the cool kids and ignored by the girls. He's bit by a radioactive spider and gains powers in the process. He gets the "with great power comes great responsibility" speech from Uncle Ben. Then he fails to apply it, and because of that, Uncle Ben dies. So he becomes a superhero, gets a job at the Daily Bugle, kind of gets MJ, doesn't get MJ, really gets MJ, loses MJ, and he struggles just in general with trying to balance work, life, and being a superhero. This version is classic, traditional, straightforward Spider-Man. In many aspects of this, Maguire does really well. You can certainly buy him as this nerdy guy that would be picked on by the bullies and ignored by girls, much more so than you could buy Garfield in that sort of role. He certainly can sell the awkwardness of Peter Parker. Other aspects of the performance I don't think have aged all that well. First off, Maguire was 26 years old when he made this film, and he looks like a 26-year-old trying to play a high schooler. Second, his performance can come off kind of corny or hammy at times, A lot of that goes back to Sam Raimi's direction, but you can't ignore the kind of infamous tears or dance numbers. Still a great traditional take on the character with maybe just a few too many theatrics. But coming in first place is Tom Holland. If Tobey Maguire provided the traditional take on the character and Andrew Garfield tried to do a modern interpretation but fumbled a little bit, I think that Holland's version is a successful reimagining of the character for the 21st century. The MCU take on the character abandons the 1950s and 60s high school stereotypes about nerds and jocks. It doesn't seem very interested in retelling the origin story or re-exploring Uncle Ben. Instead, it leans heavily into the fact that Peter Parker is a high schooler. Therefore, he's immature, he's naive, and he's incredibly socially awkward. The filmmakers understand that just putting glasses on someone in the 21st century doesn't make them nerdy, and likewise, being nerdy doesn't make someone a social outcast the same way it did 50 years ago. So they put him on the science team, they send him off to competitions. He's certainly nerdy, but they kind of abandon some of those outdated high school social hierarchies of the traditional story. Holland's version also benefits greatly from being inside of the MCU, as we want to see Peter Parker, Spider-Man interact with Tony Stark and the rest of the Avengers. We want to see a high schooler's perspective on the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Therefore, we can forgive the fact that it's not giving us all of the traditional classic hallmark elements of Spider-Man, because they're giving us something just as interesting in its place. And I think that Tom Holland captures the spirit of a high school superhero perfectly. His humor feels organic and plays out of his personality. He has the longing to be accepted by his peers. His interactions with MJ and the romance there is perfectly awkward in a very high school kind of way. And just as a person, I think he's the most physically capable of our Spider-Man actors. Not that he looks like a bodybuilder, but he looks like a Spider-Man-esque build for a person like this. And when he needs to go serious and needs to cry, it fits in the tone of the film that he's in. With all of that said, now that we're a few years into his version of Spider-Man, I do hope that they move back towards some of the iconic imagery of Spider-Man. Still, I think he is our best interpretation yet, so he comes in at number 1. If you enjoyed this video, I've got more just like it right over there, where I rank the Spider-Man movies, the Spider-Man villains. I talk about 8 canceled Spider-Man movies, all in that playlist right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.